I saw on the news where Tucker Carlson was reporting that stats on illegal immigrants are often misleading. And I know from my research that stats often very blatantly can be used to lie and mislead people. I thought today I'd make this video to tell you a little bit about law enforcement and illegal immigrants, because one of the things that happens is there's this great gap in understanding on how law enforcement deals with illegals, what we're able to do, what the real problems are, how stats are greatly affected by all the issues that are prevalent with illegals. So we'll start by reading this, which I found. It's a 4-year-old post, but I think it sums up what a lot of people assume to be the case between law enforcement and illegal immigration. This is from somebody that was a private chef, their response to the question: why do local police not arrest illegal immigrants in their community? Do you think local police departments should enforce immigration? And then his response was, when local law enforcement take it upon themselves to police illegal immigration, it creates a dangerous situation to everybody living in that community. So it creates a dangerous situation. Statistics indicate that immigrants, legal or illegal, commit crimes at much lower rates than the native-born population. In fact, they are more likely to be victims of crimes than perpetrators. So let's say you're in this country illegally. Let's just say you're in this country illegally. You work hard to support your family, and you're the victim of a home invasion. Your belongings are taken at gunpoint. Your children and spouse are threatened with violence by armed intruders. Why the F would you call the cops if you're worried that you'll be deported and separated from your kids if you do? Not only does that mean that you'll never get justice for what happens to you, it also means that the people who committed the crime are free to go out and do it again. It makes it so there's essentially no consequence for abusing illegal immigrants because they would have no way to respond within the justice system. So this is the leftist view. The poor illegal immigrants don't get to use the justice system because they're violating the law. And then there's the whole thing about they're not able to report it, so crimes aren't reported. So what we're effectively talking about here is an admission in the same post that crimes involving illegal immigrants, whether they're the victims or the perpetrators, are underreported. Which is the point. If you're using statistics and you know there's a big glaring hole in those statistics, then you know that they're not accurate. So, anyway, the belief, statistics indicate they're not committing crimes at rates as native-born population. So, there's so much wrong with this. They don't understand anything with law enforcement. For starters, the police do not enforce immigration law. The key here is that everyone believes they can't call the police, so they don't. And that can be generally true. They fear this, but it's also unrealistic because immigration works largely at the border and 100 miles from the border. If you get deep into the country, there's no one to deport you. There's no one to drive you back to the border. There's no ICE officials going to come for typically a misdemeanor crime, even a lot of felony crimes. They're not going to show up to deport you. It's just not going to happen. The key, they believe they can't call the police, and so they don't. And there's not money, there's not manpower to get these people. There's not the resources to track some of these illegals that commit these crimes. It's nearly impossible to confirm if they're legal or not. They might be legal. For an officer to run them through a database, it's not the same thing as the average American that has a social security number, date of birth, driver's license, fingerprints on file probably. Only someone far along in the process, issued identification numbers, speaks decent English. These are the people that manage to get put into databases. Regular Americans are all up in it, but not your typical illegal. A majority of illegals, even those building up to citizenship, are not in the databases. And the perpetrators are likely illegals themselves, meaning underreporting, My experience is that illegals are largely large groups of men that work off the books. Families do not typically move around and are more settled and ingrained in an immigrant community with similar illegals, similar language and stuff around them. They'll take advantage of welfare programs. They'll use their legal child as leverage for those programs. It's not uncommon to see even like Asian immigrants living in, multiple generations living with dozens of people in a small apartment, working in an Asian community off the books. So some of the biggest issues that arise is not speaking English. Even if you've lived here for decades, they might not learn it. My estimate is that maybe, 1 in 8, 1 in 10 might have enough English to get by. When they come across law enforcement, no speak English. It's the best way to avoid answering questions. So they don't speak the language. They don't talk to police. They're scared to. I had a theft case years ago, and I was investigating it as a detective, and I found that there was a contractor that was hiring illegals, and they were being victimized because he was hiring them to do work, promising to pay them under the table, lower than normal wages, cash, and he was finding ways to make excuses and drag them out and not pay them. And then he actually had their tools and stuff locked up in houses that were under construction. So that was where I learned a lot about how they carry cash. They get robbed by each other a lot. And in this case, instead of, the work being paid for, they broke in, stole their tools, and moved on. But the contractor refused to pay them. He was hiring them illegally, ridiculously low rate. They broke into a house under construction, stole their tools back. He wasn't really a victim. There was no report from the construction company ever made for the break-in. No provable case. And I just happened to be able to get my hands on this particular crew and able to interview them a little bit, enough to know that they were being treated improperly. The contractor was breaking the law. They were breaking the law. Fraud, breaking and entering, and theft all around. But they take jobs off the books. They don't pay taxes. If they do use an SSN, it's typically, it's nothing for them to steal it, work under someone else's social security number. It's very hard for an employer to tell that. They generally don't care. It's not like they're filing taxes. They move on to a different job. They're taking jobs off the books for Americans. And they can do very good work. Some of these workers, for example, do very good wallboarding and mudding. And they're very fast, excellent skills. But they're taking the job away from an American that would get paid a fair wage. And you can say what you will. Americans might not want some of these jobs that they're filling. But what happens is, if someone doesn't fill it, the pay will go up until someone does want to fill it. That's how it works. And then Americans filling the job, or legal work visa immigrants can fill the job at the much higher pay. And instead, they're using fake information a lot of times because ICE is not going to come get them. They're too far away from the border. Few jobs fingerprint people, identify specifically. Fake IDs are all around. They can get IDs from other states that who knows if the information is correct or not. Who knows if it's somebody that looks like them that's in their family. And you need probable cause to make an arrest. And it's very difficult when the person has no known address. They have no information on file. You don't know if they're using someone else's ID. It makes it very difficult for a non-citizen if they're a victim or a suspect in a case. They move around a lot. Typically driving without a license and insurance, no knowledge of vehicle or traffic laws, can't read some of the signs. They don't take care of their vehicles to make sure they're safe for the road. A lot of cultures, they drink very heavily. DUIs are very common. And traffic offenses for you and I lead to suspended licenses. They don't even have them to begin with. much less driving on a suspended license. And if they do have a license from another state, very difficult to do anything with it. Here I'm at, driving under suspension is a misdemeanor of the first degree. It is 6 months in jail is the maximum per offense. And you can have courts that can allow people to have dozens and dozens of driving under suspension offenses without even making the person serve a day in jail. And that's a normal American, much less an illegal that shows a foreign driver's license, has some other fake ID from another state, an out-of-state license, where they say, no, I can drive. And you just don't know. Is it valid? Is it? How can we check this? The courts have difficulty, and they say, well, okay. And they let them off. You know, if you had dozens and 6 months was the offense maximum for each one of them, you could be talking to a person that could have 10, 12 years in jail if they were convicted on all of those and given the maximum fine. But, you know, a lot of times, small fine, or they get released, they get a ticket, and they never show up for court, and you don't know if their name's even correct, their date of birth's even correct. You know, there's these issues with surnames and telling if a person is, you know, really a Gonzalez or a, you know, some other, if that's a mom's name or whatever. You don't know. And these are the problems. Jails typically don't take people unless it's a crime of violence or a felony. And when you don't solve a case, when you don't have a really good suspect, you don't have probable cause to say that that's the person that did it, then they don't make it into the stats. Those things are crimes that were committed, but you don't have a person to put that on. Is it an illegal immigrant? What is their race? What is their ethnicity? You can't tell those kind of things if you don't have a conclusion to that case. You don't have enough information to continue with that case. So a lot of times they skate and they're never identified. And sometimes you're not even sure of the person's age. I've had cases before where you've had adult illegals using someone's ID that shows them to be an underage. And they might be 18 or 19 or 20 and they have an ID if someone shows they're 16. You go to lock them up. Well, do I have to take them to big boy jail or do they have to go to the juvenile detention center? These things are very difficult to tell and very difficult to prove. A lot of times they'll get, you know, someone will be dating an American, typically a female, will buy them a vehicle. They'll drive without a license. The vehicle's registered to that girlfriend's name or something along those lines. And she has some old address. You can't find them there. Whenever you run plates or anything on the vehicle, it's not going to come back to the driver. It could be some woman that's a couple states away. And it's very easy for them to flee. And a lot of these illegals are probably fleeing their home countries, possibly for crimes they committed, possibly serious crimes. It's a very good reason to flee a country, right? If you know that you're going to go down for some serious crimes, just go somewhere else, start over. And yeah, come across the border, serious illnesses, they don't go to the doctor regularly. When they do, they get mandatory health care. You should know that. Someone has an emergency situation, they get health care. So, who pays for that? They don't. Even if they did give their name and all that other information, they could skate on the bill. And think about them coming from really far in South America. If you're coming up from, say, Venezuela, and you're stopping in all these other countries on their way to the U.S. that have more in common with your culture, language, and things like that than the U.S. does, and yet you want to come here. That's not how taking someone that's being persecuted is supposed to work. And these cartels, you know, they make billions of dollars. They use these people for drug mules. They charge them for passage over the border. And they make them be mules for other illegals, sex trade, slavery, women and kids attacked to make the trip. They try on foot. There a lot of times they're going through a desert or something by themselves with, kids down at the border are somewhere between $350 to $400 on the low end, and the cartels can sell them for as high as $3,500 to $4,000. So this is a big problem. This is a big racket. You even have, well, let me talk about this first. A lot of police departments are told not to even worry with illegals, not to bother arresting illegals. One of the things that happens is you typically give people, especially in a misdemeanor, some kind of citation or paperwork to appear in court. And it's important to know that if you can identify a person and they don't show up for court, most of the time that means you can go and arrest them at their house, find them at their work. It's very easy to take somebody that's a part of the community that committed a minor offense and lock them up, to find them later if they don't show up for court. If you're an illegal, that's not always the case, because is your address correct? Is your name correct? Are your fingerprints going to be entered in some kind of database to be able to identify you later? A lot of departments have gone to not even worrying about arresting people, because you take them to court, and even if they go to court, drug before the court immediately, let's say it's during court hours, and you say, Judge, just caught this guy driving without a license. They say, okay, post $50 and, show up for court next Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever. They pay the money. They walk out the door. You've wasted all your time for someone that's not going to show up, not going to do anything. And a lot of departments are going to not even dealing with them because you don't have the resource to do it. If you arrested all the illegals as a law enforcement agency, and you were responsible for housing them and clothing them and then taking them back to whatever country they're from, and don't assume it's just to Mexico, think of the expense and the time for that. And then you call up ICE or somebody that's supposed to take care of that, and they say, well, we're not coming for that. Turn them loose. Or ask them to go turn themselves in. These things are, far from perfect, but it's almost like a lot of law enforcement agencies have to give up, because our realm is not illegal immigration. It is very hard to deal with, much like the fentanyl problem. So then it leads to the next thing that you might not be aware of. Is there actually companies, for-profit companies, that are paid to house migrants? And these are typically like border states, but they can be in other states. And it's companies that are paid to shelter usually kids and families. And they make money off of these families because it takes, I think the average is about $250 cost, per day for an illegal immigrant, but they're paid like $750 to $1,000 per day for each illegal immigrant. So they make 3 to 4 times what it actually costs, and they don't have these requirements to be clean and healthy and all these other things. So it's like just basically a big giant migrant camp, typically tents and things like that aren't very expensive. And they get paid millions of dollars by our government to house them. And for what purpose? To release them back into the United States after a while? A lot of these people aren't shipped back. They're not kicked out. They're not asked to remain in Mexico until their hearing. Even if they're giving a date to appear in court 2 years from that point, most do not show up. It's like any other court. You can pretty much be assured that if it's an illegal alien, they will not show up for court. People that come into the United States and say, hey, I'm here, I want to get citizenship and go through the process and all that other stuff, those are the ones that are going to show up. Those are the ones you don't have to house in these kind of things. They're not the ones that are just going to get pitched across the border and come right back. Because, let's face it, you fail, you get shipped back, you do it again. You make the trip again. Endless cycle of someone just coming back into the country until they win. Until they're undiscovered. So, now I turn you to another story. Speaking of law enforcement, Confusion over California bill that seems to allow illegal immigrants to become police officers. You might be thinking, oh, illegal immigrants can't become police officers. There's federal law that says you can't. You got to be a citizen of the United States. That is correct. And this was actually pointed out down in the bottom of the article that, well, this isn't what everyone means. It would not allow undocumented migrants, you mean illegal aliens, to become police officers in California, as that would be a violation of federal law. Well, then why pass this? Because it says you can be eligible if you've applied, if you're eligible for and has applied for citizenship. So you can come in and apply for citizenship, get a job, and as long as you've applied, you can be a police officer. Therefore, not a citizen. So, another way to bypass and kind of ease restrictions on federal law. State of California. And it was passed by Governor Newsom. So it looks like it's a law, I guess. So, one of the other things that happens is when you're in law enforcement, you get an extensive background check, psychological testing, medical testing, background checks all the way back to your childhood use of drugs, what kind of trouble you got into, interviews of people you know, maybe even polygraphs and all kinds of things, multiple psych tests. But background checks that if you're an illegal and you come from a country and we don't really know who you are, it's hard to get records. These other countries don't cooperate. So officers get run through the ringer, yet you have California saying, well, you don't have to be a citizen, you can be a police officer. They've already eased the restrictions on things like being a felon and drug use, and now they're taking illegals. So think about it. You could be a felon, drug using, illegal, but you applied for citizenship. Your background's going to be very incomplete. And they'll make you swear to upholding the law without being a lawful citizen that follows the laws. So, and now, I'll just end this with the Biden admin wants to, there's all this stuff about now they're starting to enforce restrictions at the border. Biden's DHS to remove 1,000 Venezuelans daily under COVID order. I thought the pandemic was over. So why them, right? Why Venezuelans? Aren't they fleeing socialism? Why, yes, they are. This flight from persecution from a failed government is because they're fleeing a socialist country. And they're fleeing a socialist country that they know was destroyed by socialism. And so guess what happens to Venezuelans when they come to the United States and they get citizenship? That's right. They vote red, and they've changed blue counties to red, and they've taken up residency and changed the dynamics of voting, and Biden doesn't want them. He's singling out Venezuelans specifically, and I wonder why that is. People that are fleeing a socialist regime and coming to the U.S. don't want more of socialist policies. They don't vote Democrat. So I'll finish with a video from Tucker Carlson about some more about stats and how they are used to lie. But I want to leave you with this. The truth is, every illegal is a lawbreaker. And that's why they're called an illegal.
But a new analysis from the Center for Immigration Studies looked more deeply into it, and we can tell you the results of that study exclusively tonight. CIS found that illegal immigrants in Texas, for example, quote, appear to be convicted of crimes such as homicide, sexual assault, and kidnapping at higher rates than the state average. For example, in one recent year, the homicide conviction rate for illegals in Texas was 3.3 per 100,000. That was much higher than the state's overall rate, which is 2.9. So these are meaningful numbers, and they demolish the talking point that's often thrown at you when you bring up this topic. Sean Kennedy was lead researcher on this for the Center for Immigration Studies. He joins us tonight. Sean, thanks so much for coming on. How did you find these numbers, which have been hidden?
Well, a number of studies had been done by first the Libertarian Cato Institute and then repeated by the Washington Post, the New York Times, debunking the notion that illegal immigrants commit any crime for that matter. And I was just curious, and my lead authors were curious as well, as to what the actual data said. And we found out that the data was being absolutely misrepresented. They claimed that native-born Americans could be compared apples to illegal immigrants, except for Texas doesn't collect data on native-born Americans. That's some other category, which includes unidentified illegal immigrants. And every year, especially in serious crime categories, Texas keeps finding more illegals in its prisons that weren't identified initially upon arrest. So there's more and more illegals amongst the convicted felons in Texas when Texas goes back and checks on people's immigration status.
So the Cato study was a lie, and yet, as you said, it was weaponized immediately by the usual liars to shout down anyone who said, well, maybe we shouldn't have open borders.
Absolutely. It was a mischaracterization, because you used to be entitled to your own opinions but not your own facts. But now you're entitled to your own facts but not your own opinions. And that's where we stand, is that one of these lies gets halfway around the world before we get our pants on with the truth. And that's where we stand on illegal immigration and crime, because a subsequent study by the University of Wisconsin also confirmed Cato's analysis, except for it made even more egregious methodological errors and mischaracterized more data about illegal immigrants and what Texas collects. And we spoke to Texas Department of Public Safety at length and got the original data they used, and it just doesn't say what they said it says. It doesn't include the categories that they represent in their papers.
Well, that makes sense, that people who are willing to break immigration law will break other laws. I mean, most normal people would not break immigration law. If I said, hey, Sean, why don't you and I sneak into Japan? They've got a high standard of living, good food, you can ride the subway without getting murdered. Let's sneak in. You would say, we can't because it's against the law, right? So it takes a certain sort of person to sneak into a country, does it not?
Absolutely. It also takes a certain kind of country to allow people to come in with impunity and not hold them to account. At the end of the day, we don't know how many people in our prisons, though some estimates by the Bureau of Justice Statistics say that 1 in 5 prisoners in California is illegal, 1 in 10 in Oregon, 9% in Massachusetts. So we know that they're non-citizens in our prisons. How they got there, why they're still here, are questions we need to answer. But the only way we can answer those is if we have the truth out there. And unfortunately, the media and some supposed research institutions are hell-bent on misleading us because they want to push forward their policy, facts be damned.
Yeah. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Yeah. A lot of lying about numbers. Sean Kennedy, I appreciate you're actually getting to the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Wanted to let you know I'm not wearing a shirt to support Democrats with this Democrat symbol here in the top, but rather it's a shirt, Donkeypox, the disease killing America. I have shirts like it and other funny shirts at the 𝓟𝓛𔔔𝓐𝓢𔔔 store. Please check it out if you're interested in some political gear. Thanks.